Hey, I'm Amar.
And I'm Matthew.
And this is Our Side of the Coin. Hey guys, welcome back to another week on Our Side of the Coin. We brought another guest in after a few weeks. Say hi to Satish.
Hi.
Alright, anyway, so today we're gonna... Yes, I know. Applause for Satish. Alright, anyway, we're gonna get into the topic...
You could have said Satish.
Okay, Satish or Satish? Anyway, the topic we're gonna...
Satish.
Satish! The topic we're gonna get into this week
the topic
is gonna
is what? How should you pronounce names? The correct way or the way that's easier?
Okay, that's not...
Amar, and then we have Matthew.
Alright, anyway, the real topic this week, once these hooligans settle down, is how should parents react to a bad report card?
How should parents record it?
Alright, Matthew, go ahead and start before Satish.
Okay, so how should parents react to a bad report card? A bad report card, bad grades at the end of a semester it's a wake-up call that you need to change something about the way you're trying to attempt the class, either putting in more effort or changing the way you practice. But I don't really think that the parents should try to encourage them to do more work or change their habits. But I don't think there should be any punishments.
Okay, I feel that either way, getting a bad report card, it's concerning for parents, and you can understand that they're concerned for their child, and they have to be concerned. But I feel like they should it comes in between what happened, like when they got those bad grades. Is it because just they're struggling to study versus their habits? Are they not doing their work? Because depending on how parents should react, if it's like they're not doing work, then that's more of a serious situation, because that just means they're not caring. Versus maybe they are caring, but they're struggling, and then parents can look towards helping them. So
what I'm thinking is when a parent sees a bad report card with a kid, I kind of agree with what Matthew was saying and what Satosh was saying, but there needs to be a little bit more than that. When the parents see a bad report card, I'd say about 50% of the time, it's not necessarily the parent's fault usually, and sometimes it's just the kid. And it's great that it serves up as a wake-up call, but we need something more to motivate the student and maybe offer consequences.
Well, I think you brought up an interesting point, because you said 50% of the time it's not the parent's fault.
I don't have a statistic.
And that brings up, but just the idea.
That
brings up the idea of what is the role of the parent in the student's education, because the first thing that came to mind when you said that is, why would it be the parent's fault at all? How much of a role does the parent have in the student's education?
And Satish, you can just jump in anytime you have a point. Okay. But what I meant by that is parents are, especially when the kids are young, I would say up to 5th grade this is applicable. And parents up to 5th grade are in control of setting the priority student, because when we're young, we don't know anything. We don't realize that good grades now will lead to good grades later. Or something along the similar line. Hard work now will lead to habits for hard work later. And so it's up to the parents to set those good habits that will lead to eventual success.
But shouldn't it be up to the school to set those good habits?
The school will not... so in an ideal world, it would be up to the school, and the parents would have minimal...
But not every school would be setting up those standards.
That's what I'm saying. In an ideal world, a school would do those things, but we're not living in an ideal world. And the reality is, there's anywhere between 400 to 1,000 students in one elementary school. There's no way a school can get to that many students.
But whether at an early stage, the parents should be setting those standards for their children. If they're struggling now, then they should be still doing. That's why parents are there. At the end of the day, they're there to guide their child in the right direction. Whether they're struggling now, not every child sets the same standards at the same time. Everyone has a different time where they develop their standards, and when
it's up to the parents to keep them on those standards. So that's why I would say the parents are still important in a child's education role. Okay. Now, I guess back to the issue at hand. Now, what happens if, as a parent, you see that your child got a bad report card? How much of that blame do you put on yourself, and how much do you put on the student?
It really depends on the details.
Okay. Do we want to make a couple hypotheticals?
Okay, yeah. Thought experiment.
Okay, so the first hypothetical is, let's say you are perhaps of the lower socioeconomic class. You work 14 to 16 hours a day. The parent. You are a parent, okay? Let's imagine you're a parent. You work 14 to 16 hours a day. You do not have, you maybe can give your child 30 to 45 minutes tops to help them with their homework and make sure or even less than that, because you're working 2 jobs.
Okay.
So now how much, and now your student comes home with a bad report card. How much of that blame do you put on yourself? How do you fix yourself? Or how much do you put on the student?
It would be more on the student because the parent is less involved. But, okay, I don't really know if this is the best way to approach this, is on how much is it the parent's fault.
Okay, not so much. That's horrible wording. How much should the parents fix themselves versus how much should they approach their child and address their child's?
Well, there's flaws between both the children and the parent. Like, I mean, the parents have to look to themselves first and see what they did wrong.
Yes.
Rather than looking at their child. Because at the end of the day, obviously your child is making their own mistakes too, and then that's why the parent has to go there and give that advice.
At the same time, I don't know. I'm gonna draw on a little bit of personal. Now my situation is different. Thankfully, I'm in the middle socioeconomic class, and my mom works like part time, and my dad works full time. My mom is able to give my younger siblings like enough time, spends 3 or 4 hours with them a day on schoolwork. Mind you, I have like 3 elementary
Basically 4 siblings.
I have 4 siblings. 3 of them are in the elementary school. So, but one of them has or 2 of them rather of the 3 have a tendency to like to procrastinate, to like to for example, like they won't get like. So I don't like. I'm here. I have a 4.0 GPA, right? You know, I could set myself as a standard for my family, right? Now, but then you have children, and it's not so much natural intellect. So my youngest brother has an issue where he has a lot more tendencies to lean towards video games before homework. Now, who do you blame for that? When you know that the parent, right, in this situation has raised a good kid, right, who has a standard straight, but then they continue to raise kids and like a couple of them fall out of line.
Well, that's just an inevitability of life. The human brain puts forth, like the okay. There's one word specifically for self-gratification or whatever it was before like thinking long term. People always want the short-term rewards. So that's just something that both the parent and the student has to work around. And in terms of like what sort of action you should take after that, I guess it's a whole different topic about how much of parents should parents use more negative feedback or use more positive.
And I guess
feedback?
that's what we ultimately want to get back here. Do we want positive feedback, negative feedback, or does it vary by case?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it'd be varying by case because, well, depending on what the child's problem is. Okay.
We can make hypotheticals here.
Okay, well, I guess I can
Point at Matthew.
It's Matthew. Guys, he's a hypocrite. Okay. But, okay, in reality, Matthew is the older brother of his family. But, like, in my situation, like, Amar was the older brother, his siblings, I'm the younger sibling out of my family. And the way I was raised, like, in my point of view, my brother was set to the highest standards. That's how every older sibling is set. Because they're the first child. This is the first child that's going through this process that the family's experiencing, that the parents have to experience. So at the end of the day, when the parents are so busy with one child, you can understand the fact, like, my parents could not focus on much time as me because they thought the school was already taking care of me at the end. So you can't put the full blame on the parents, I would say.
But you can't put the full blame on the
student as well. Because it just varies between, like, I'll say I started freshman year, like, slacking off. I was, like, how Amar described his younger siblings. I procrastinated a lot. My GPA was not what I wanted to set to, was not what my parents expected, like how my brother's was. He averaged a 4.0 throughout his whole high school life, and I started with a 3.2 or something. And it just had that mindset, this laziness mindset came in me because I don't want to put it on my parents because they had, like, my dad had kidney disease for 2 months, so he always went to dialysis. My mom had to work part-time. She would stay up till 9, come home. I just had no one. And at the end of the day, in my mind, I don't carry that on my parents as it's completely their fault. Because I feel like I should have looked at my brother too. I know my brother, he kept me out of his life at the time because he was experiencing these things himself. And he was going through his whole new experience. But at the time, I feel like I was old enough to understand the world situation today and how reality is. So I would consider between the situation if, like, your parents I would say your parents should give you more positive feedback depending on how much they impacted your life versus if they've impacted your life so much but you're still not keeping it up.
So you're saying if parents have like a larger influence on your life and you're still not able to keep up, then they should be giving you negative feedback. Whereas if they've been busy and they know it's not necessarily your fault, they should be giving you positive feedback. I can get on that train. The only issue I can see with that is that there are a lot of psychological studies which indicate the negative effects of negative feedback. However, from my experience, negative feedback, I was like made through negative feedback essentially. I'm not even kidding. Like, but like we see that negative feedback also tends to make perfectionists and possible like. And nobody's saying you need to be a perfectionist. Obviously you don't need a perfect GPA to be successful in life. A lot of this stuff doesn't correlate to success later in life as well. Success isn't financially based or anything. But my point is that these negative feedbacks can stimulate that, okay, I need to avoid this in order to do this. I need to avoid this in order to do this. And while it comes with some costs, sometimes the benefits can outweigh it.
I think maybe we want to examine the benefits and the costs
of negative feedback
of that specific kind of negative feedback. And I guess I would start.
Okay. I mean, the first thing we can go with the costs right off the bat. I just listed some of the benefits, and I think one of the primary causes is we want to look at the psychological effects. What do you think what happens to a person?
I think so. The first thing that sort of came to my mind, I say. Just like before I start, I just want to make it known. I would probably lean more on the positive feedback than the negative feedback, so you might want to keep that in mind. But I would say one of the costs is if a parent, like, if a child comes back with a bad report card and the parent, like, scolds them or does whatever punishment, right? The student might feel cheated because they might have done, like, everything they could have possibly done.
If they had, like, done their work, let's say they didn't come, if they came with a report card, but it showed that they have done all their work, but maybe it wasn't, like, up to the standards that they had tried to set, or it's too difficult for them, then giving negative feedback in that direction, they'd feel pressure.
A lot more.
This might be an interesting thing. So, at my old school, report cards, they gave them in a bar graph, right, of the grades and the subjects, and they had 2 bars on the same subject. They had a bar that, like, it was out 4.0. So they had a bar of what your grade was, and then they had another bar that was like a dotted line on top of it of your effort. They graded, like, your effort. The teacher, what they thought the effort of Zoom was, they also put that on the bar. So you could see what their effort was and what their grade was. Now, I don't know how accurate, like, that...
because you can't...
that's a
effort's
very
not something that's numerically...
But it's still, like, it still has some truth to it because it's the teacher...
Just rating
how... The teacher can be very biased is an issue with that.
That's another thing.
But... I guess I can see what your point is there, and I think that's not a bad alternative. But at the same time, we need a more quantifiable way to measure that before we start releasing that. Because if it's not, like, sometimes you and a teacher just don't get along, a teacher will keep you out of, even if you're, like, doing, like, very well in the class. I've had this happen to me before, right? Regardless, right, these teachers you'll have an A in the class, but these teachers will, like, assume you as a mediocre student, right? They don't really look at you for who you are sometimes. But what I'm getting at is that, okay, but what about those students who have, like, high grades but low effort? What would you do for those?
Well, if the metric that we are putting success on is grades, then if the grade is good, it doesn't really even matter.
Well, low effort can mean, like, whether they're either cheating or they just are, like, okay.
Well, I mean, cheating takes a lot of effort if you think about it. Sometimes
it takes a lot of effort in the wrong moral.
Okay. Well, I mean...
No, Matthew, shut up.
If cheating is moral and right, that's a whole entire debate.
Yeah, but okay, so you measure between whether cheating or if they just already know... Like, okay, I'll be honest with you. Physics, I do not set a good standard at all in class, alright?
Oh my god.
But when I go home...
Physics is Astro World.
Stop. Don't talk about it. Alright? I had a debriefing moment after. Okay, but when I get home, my dad makes me study my off, okay? Literally but yeah, my dad makes me study so hard at home. Like, he is, because think about it, generally every engineer, there's one thing that they have excelled at, math or physics, alright? And I don't know what's my dad's obsession with physics, but every time there's a random, like if I'm just doing some random assignment, he sits on my computer and then he just starts talking about these theories. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, I have an assignment to do. I can't listen, but it's so interesting at the same time. But at the end of the day, the help he provides for me and how I study, I have a 96 in the class, and I've been doing very well at home.
That's sort of a thing you brought up about the parents and, like, parents putting their expectations on a child and sort of steering them in a certain direction. Like, I can relate to this too. I think we can all relate to
and
this.
And a great example of this, sorry, I'll let you go back, but I just wanted to, like, quickly mention, have you guys heard of helicopter parenting? Mm-hmm. So, if for those listeners who aren't familiar, helicopter parenting is essentially the idea that certain parents, regardless of their kids' passions, will set them, like, from the get-go into one. And, like, a most common one, an Asian stereotype is, like, helicopter parenting is where most Asian parents will either get their children to become doctors, engineers, or lawyers from the get-go, from, like, before they know what they're...
That's also a thing that happens in music a lot.
Yeah, and even in sports and, like...
Basically any field.
Yeah, but that's what I wanted to get out there. Helicopter parenting.
Yeah, and I think that also should, like, a big factor to consider is how important the grades are and sort of like what you're trying to measure success on, because what is the purpose of a punishment? The purpose of a punishment is to correct the wrong behavior and try to encourage a right behavior. And it's important to identify what the wrong behaviors and what the right behaviors are.
And I guess the situation that we need to discuss is, and we've been beating around it a lot, is I think when you have a child come home with a bad report card, you have three major situations. One, you're helping the child as much as you can, but the child is not giving any effort. Two, you and the child are both working as hard as you can, but the child isn't producing as the results that you'd expected. Or three, that you're not able to provide as much for your child, and they're not able to keep up their grades as such. And so I think let's take this one situation at a time. The first situation might be the most controversial, where if the child is low effort, but you're putting a high effort into them, what kind of feedback would you leave? How would that look? And how would this affect them? And is it a good or bad idea?
Okay.
You go ahead. You haven't talked in a while.
All right. Well, I guess in that case, not only personally, but in my opinion, I would lean, well, in terms of negative feedback, I'd lean towards, like, I would understand if parents lean towards negative feedback in that specific situation, because they're working so hard to provide for their children, and, like, if they like kind of just show that anger towards their children, but, like, in a sense of direction where they're telling, like, realize, like, we've done all this for you.
Get your act together.
Yeah, it just kind of fixes in your head. Like, there are times where, I remember freshman year, how much my dad cried. Like, and it kind of fixed in my head, like, it wasn't the pressure from my brother, it was more the pressure that I'm putting towards them. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of steered me into...
And that's a big point, especially when we see with parenting, is that parents sometimes feel helpless in these scenarios. And, well, I kind of agree with Satish. At this point, I don't think a straight up negative, hey, stop, you're not doing this, don't do this thing approach is exactly, I would prefer, like, the carrot on a stick method, where you have a carrot dangling out in front of them, whether that be you're choosing like a material possession, or like dangling them, hey, if you do this in the future, you'll get this, right? Hopes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the stick being like, keep moving or else.
I think
you'll never reach your dreams if you keep doing.
There are also negatives to that positive.
Of course, everything has pros and cons.
I think that that scenario where the student is either making a choice the student is making a choice to not put in effort is the most clear example where you would want to use negative feedback because there is a clear negative behavior that you're trying to correct.
The issue with just straight up feedback that I was thinking about, and this I've seen this firsthand, is that you become very rebellious, and if eventually negative feedback does not work, it bounces off you, and you won't listen to any sort of feedback, because negative feedback is more of a drastic measure than positive feedback. Positive feedback will encourage them, and then if that doesn't work, then most people will resort to negative feedback. If that doesn't work, what happens to the student? They're not listening to feedback. They're not willing to get better. If they don't get better, it's not because they don't want to do better. It's because they want to spite you at this point.
Yeah, and
that would not only tear apart your family, it would tear apart their future. It would tear apart all their relationships. It would tear apart who they are as a person.
Well, okay, so there's another thing about this argument. So there's also another part to this, which is how important are the students' grade at this moment, and like what point of their educational journey are they at, and like because you brought up like the point, this could tear up your family, this could tear up your future, and that's only true certain times. Like if it's like their fourth grade report card, like second semester.
I'm not saying that their report card being bad is going to tear up your future. My point was, if you continuously abuse negative feedback towards your children, they'll become resistant to it. That could lead to those consequences.
I can agree with that. But there's also the exact opposite.
A fourth grade report card tearing apart his family.
I don't know. There's also the exact opposite argument, is that too much positive feedback. If you give them too much positive feedback, they won't be scared. Like, maybe not scared, but they won't take your negative feedback.
Yeah, and that's why I said the carrot on the... sorry, go ahead.
No.
Carrot on a stick method, because you'll offer them enough positive feedback to see that, hey, there's a reason I'm doing this. I'm not just doing it because my parents want me to. But the stick is going to keep them in line. Mm-hmm. You can control where they're going with the stick. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then, thinking about all of this and what the parents can do, and then that's where, like, this is where, like, the hypothetical situation, if they have their free mind, like, if they're not busy. And then you have to also then factor in
what right now we're just focusing on the one where the parent is helping as much as they can and the student is lazy.
Yeah.
Well,
then in that case, there is two possible, then there's only, I feel like at that point there would be only two situations where it's either the student versus the parent.
Yeah. So you want to move on to the next situation, because we got like a couple minutes left here. So the next situation was that the parent is trying to help as much, like not as much as they can, but they're helping, and the student is trying, but like, or rather, this was one of 4 situations, right? We had 4 situations, 3. I believe. 3.
You're the one who keeps coming up with all timeline.
We'll make it 4. We got like a minute left on each of these, so. So this situation would be the parent is trying some, and the student is trying some, and they're not getting the grades that they want.
Trying some.
Like on a like.
I think you changed it from last time.
They need Obama.
No, I added another scenario.
Okay.
Yeah. I was gonna quantify that between some and the next one as much as they can.
I think we can for the some and the most. I think the logical step after the bad report card is a signal that you're doing something wrong, and you need to take time. Like, this is also what parent-teacher conferences are for, but maybe just a conference between a parent and a student, or maybe just the student having a conference with themselves. Trying to...
parent-teacher conferences, I mean, even like, okay, well, we have all those meetings with the parent-teacher conferences, but they have to move fast. There are times where you can just go talk privately with the teacher.
I think, that's true. But I think that if the student or the parent should evaluate how they're approaching the class and what they can do differently, whether that's academic or behavior, and it could be both.
Right, but so how do you discipline the child? Do you discipline the child in the scenario?
I think you make your decision after your evaluation of what you're doing wrong. Okay. If what you're doing wrong is more towards the behavioral side, then I think there's more likely a chance for negative feedback. But if it's more academic, then that's a change in the academics, which I don't really think warrants punishment.
I can agree with that. You got anything on that? Okay. So the next situation is a little trickier, where the parents and the students are going all out. Right, and I guess you are already kind of addressed this, but like they're going all out and they're just not seeing the results, and it's like I don't know, like if that would be the school. Could you bring the school into that? How would you address this one?
That was gonna be my first thought. Is at that point it might be a fault of the school curriculum. Like it might just be not.
And an interesting scenario, the side tidbit is like with my parents continuously complain about how this new common curriculum teaches math the stupid way and all of it.
It's been around for like 10 years.
Quotation mark new, but like all this like new ways, and they can't teach them this way because they learned it this way, right? And like I think that's interesting to examine in this scenario, because the parent is helping as much as they can, and the student is trying to learn. But when you got and I see this a lot because I used to tutor. And I see how schools are starting to teach. A common one now is Eureka math. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's a very common math method that a lot of Michigan schools are adopting now. It's more like, it's similar to IB math, where you give them the students, okay, this is do this step, then do this step, then do this step, then do this step. And then eventually all those little steps add up to become one big problem.
All right, so it's more like making the students...
a build up instead of rather than you have to add this column first, carry this, and like straight into the addition.
I think I see. So it's more like trying to get the students to figure it out for themselves.
Even our parents, they've had a lot of hard time understanding Wahi's curriculum. Like still today, every time they look at my power school and they're like what is a 7 out of 8? This and that. It's not easy. I can understand because we go through this school every day. It's just kind of built in our head. But when they look through our
7 out of 8, oh my god, that's like 80%. Why are you failing your classes?
It's so hard to explain to my dad. Like this is the situation here. It's okay. And like if you're missing something, like or like depend because they don't teachers don't even go over how the like grading system properly works with parents. They kind of go over how like the syllabus, like what we're gonna go over through school. Even when like in parent teacher conferences, they're not gonna go over. I feel like then that's where the school comes in. Like I can agree with the curriculum part where the school comes in because they have to what the school is providing for the parents too. Yeah, so. Then we thought mainly there was 2 factors between this report card system. There should honestly be 3, which is the school system itself.
Yeah.
Because actually, I feel like at that point when you both are trying so hard, then you have to realize maybe the school system's failing, and parents would investigate that. And if they see that that's the failure, then move schools. Honestly,
I have nothing to add.
Yeah, I agree. All right, last scenario. Let's hit that real quick and wrap this up. So the last scenario was the parent. For unforeseen circumstances, maybe they're sick, maybe they work 2 jobs in order to keep their family even afloat, right? And they're not able to help their kid as much, and their kid comes home, and their kid is trying some, but they're not able to produce. I'm not saying the kid is going all hard, because obviously you're not going to go 100% if your parents aren't watching you as a young child. That's just common sense, right? Who's going to stop me if I do this? But what should the parent do in this situation to get their kid back on track or themselves?
I think this is sort of similar to the last scenario in that I think maybe the parent should try to get some help from the school if the parent, because I mean in at the end of the day it's the school's job.
Okay, well then okay, you know what, honestly I can say then like to my middle school, like to how I was in like middle school building up to freshman year of high school, that was like, this is like my most applicable situation. So yeah, my parents were not there for me as a child. I didn't find, like, I was kind of misguided. I was into, not only that, I had this this could be another topic, but, like, if we had more time, we would have branched on, like, because I was going to include the scenario of how outside people besides, like, schools and everything affected your life. Mm-hmm. So, like, at the time, I was very lonely. I gained a lot of weight coming in. We moved from Indiana to here with, like, my dad's dialysis. We were in kind of a financial situation. Now we're in more of a middle class ground, but like at the time it was a different situation. So coming there, I didn't really have any friends. I didn't know anything in Michigan. I just sat home. Only thing I knew to enjoy myself while my brother was busy with his life was play games, and I just carried myself away from the importance of studying. So at the end, I feel like in that scenario, where schools should come, that's where like parents should notify the school that like maybe can you, for like this time period, they could keep special attention to how their child is doing.
Okay, and yeah, I kind of agree with what you guys are saying. We're kind of out of time, so thank you for tuning in this week. Please like, share, subscribe. Everything else, we're desperate. I'm desperate. Matthew doesn't care. Yeah. All right, catch you guys next week.
Bye.